Hello, welcome to Signal and Noise. This is our hopefully weekly podcast brought to you by Market Once. We're a Market Once company, and Andrew and I work at, I guess, a subsidiary of Market Once. We're Rocket. Hey, Andrew, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Brian. It is snowy here in southeastern Indiana. None of my kids are sick today, and it's a good morning. It's a good morning.
Way to kick off a Monday, right? Is to have some snow and record a podcast and be healthy.
Yes, absolutely.
Joining us today, I'm really excited. I kind of wanted someone from KS&R to come on the podcast. I have a lot of respect for their people and company. And Ben Cortese, he's the Vice President of Decision Sciences and Innovation at KS&R. Hey, Ben, how are you, sir?
Doing well, Brian and Andrew. How are you guys today?
Doing great. Really nice to meet you. And I'm excited for the topic today.
Mhm.
And, right before we started recording, I'm kind of going in intentionally a little bit vague. And I'm excited to see where this leads us. And, the topic is extending insights through custom chatbots, how grounding LLMs on proprietary data can extend research. That sounds really fun to me. And so I'm happy to have you on. So welcome.
Yeah, good to be here.
I'm curious, maybe start off with your background. And I looked you up on LinkedIn. It's a rather impressive background. I'd love to kind of have you talk about it.
Sure. So I've been with KS&R a little over a decade, 10 years in August, which is a lot, but there's many reasons for kind of why I've been here and have continued to grow and evolve in this space. I'm a trained data scientist, got my PhD from Syracuse just shortly before joining KS&R, and ultimately fell in love with the application of all of the statistics. And the clients that we serve are so diverse that every day is really a different day. And so as the lead of Decision Sciences and Innovation, or DS&I for short, we are the end-to-end quantitative arm of KS&R. And so I'm ultimately responsible for a team of about 12 folks that handles data science, programming, tabs, data literacy, coaching, training, consulting, anything that requires a quant survey, my team touches in at least some way or another. And so, being a centralized hub, we get to see it all. And that's really exciting, especially as we help develop products and services and then ultimately see them come to life. So part of that, obviously AI has been a huge disruptor in the quant space. And so looking forward to kind of sharing a little bit about what we're seeing and doing to try and use it as a tool, as opposed to, any of the other reactions and things that you may have seen about AI in the industry.
Yeah, I can't wait to really get into it. How long have you been working with, personally or in the workplace? How long have you been working with AI? Did you tell you mine? I started playing around with ChatGPT probably a little later than a lot of people, but early on for researchers, I guess. It was probably fall of 2019, and that's when I think a lot of the casual people started just playing around with it. So I'd love to hear your story.
So, I've been really digging into using AI to try and both roll things out internally as well as find solutions for our clients since, I think, 2022 or so. So we landed on one of the well-known enterprise solutions that is really more of a chatbot that works well for all of our team members, regardless of technical capabilities and expertise. And that one has been really useful for a lot of day-to-day activities, right? So there's certainly some things it doesn't do well, but in general, we found that as a research assistant tool, it's been super helpful. And then we've kind of used that to pivot off of just the day-to-day, everybody has access to this tool, into APIs and other specific tools to solve specific problems.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. So how are you using it, I guess, is the question. A couple of ways your team is using it.
Yeah, that's and so I think it's depending on the role that you have within our organization, folks use these tools very differently. As a data scientist and a team that leads a lot of the data folks, it's been a huge help with coding. And by coding, I don't mean, coding open ends. I mean writing code. Right. So we are heavily invested in using R as our analytical tool. And it's a fantastic resource in terms of being more efficient in that space. It's helped us with figuring out complex JavaScript and HTML for a lot of our advanced quant exercises that we have, and really just helps us become more creative. Right. So we see something and say, let's bring that to life. That usually would have taken, maybe a full week to realize how that could look on screen for a respondent. And with these tools, it really helps significantly from that perspective. I mean, also helps a lot with understanding and keeping up to date with new methods, right? Because with these things being connected to the internet now, it's ultimately replaced typical search engines for me. I know that's probably true of a lot of folks, but being able to pair that with a lot of the code has eliminated, a ton of that kind of searching and scraping for trying to find code snippets and chunks to solve problems. And ultimately, it's become a collaborator, which is something that's helped with efficiency and creativity as well.
Do you find yourself that you have to hire differently now than you did like pre-2022? Pre-2022, I would hire people, and I wanted a very strong coding background and knew R and knew other programs. Now I'm thinking, and I don't hire people that on your like that fit the skills on your team, but I'm curious if it's more around problem solving skills and curiosity skills more so than the traditional kind of coding skills. Am I wrong, or do you kind of think a little bit differently how you build your team?
So I think that because my team is highly specialized, it really depends on what that position is, right? So if we're going to be bringing on somebody relatively junior, then I would say it's kind of a pair of technical understanding, right? Because AI is not a flotation device. And that's one of my favorite quotes that came out of a conference recently, right? Where if you don't know the content that you're digging into in AI, you're already in trouble because AI is going to give you confident answers and you cannot actually understand if it's right or not. And so we don't just solve for the creativity component. Yes, that's one thing and knowing the right questions to ask, but you also have to be able to have research skills. And by research skills, I don't necessarily mean market research skills as much as validating and understand how to safely use AI and leverage those recommendations. Now, for some of our other roles, we have developers and things like that on staff. Then yes, we are looking heavily for still that technical resource. But I would say it's enabled us to transition a little bit away from just having a solid resume on paper and being a good cultural fit for the team. Because with the folks that I work with in the space that I live in, the culture is incredibly important because we collaborate all the time. And being able to use AI to help facilitate and smooth out some of those gaps is fine. But ultimately, we still do need some of that ground up skill set because folks that just use AI blindly can get us into trouble.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. So I'd love to maybe get into the kind of the original topic now. What do you mean by extending insights through custom chatbots, grounding LLMs through proprietary data? Can you maybe just give a high level of that?
Sure. So, we've been doing a lot of work trying to bridge the gap between qualitative and quantitative, especially as AI tools have evolved to really provide great solutions in the qualitative space. And so, obviously, they are large language models, not large math models or data models. And so, open or unstructured text is a great way to leverage the strength of those models. But it does take a technical viewpoint to be able to stitch all that together into something that we can confidently deliver. And so ultimately, what we sought out to do was, how can we use these technical AI style tools to be able to leverage data differently and tell a different story and feel that we are doing it responsibly in a safe and secure environment, right? Because there's all sorts of concerns around data privacy and how the models use anything that you would train them on, et cetera. And so ultimately what we've done is we've built a solution that leverages typically qualitative data at this point. So it would extend, a series of in-depth interviews or some other larger qualitative body of work or synthesis or desk research, what have you. And then we take all of that information. So thinking like the report, the transcripts, we still go through the typical research process, but instead of ending there, there's an extra step. And that extra step is taking all of that content, using it in as training data to ground a chatbot that we develop custom for our clients. And then ultimately, it allows our stakeholders and our stakeholders to be able to go through and interact with the data differently. So let's say there's white space in what we did in that particular study. Instead of having to go back and do a small outreach or ask follow-up questions, now we have this natural language interface that allows folks to talk directly with the data and the insights. And we've kind of gone through this pendulum of process of development to know ultimately what guardrails and guidelines to put on it so it's still useful, but also that it sticks to the script and it's not going to tell us a different story than what we're expecting based on all the great insights that the team has pulled together ahead of putting it into this chatbot interface.
This is fascinating. What does a deliverable look like? Is it a PowerPoint link to a deck with a link to the chatbot, or what does it look like from the user for your client?
That's a great question. And so we've been developing web tools for 6, 7 years now. I shouldn't say 6, 7. I know what's going to happen there. But ultimately,
I don't know if our listeners are that hip enough.
Okay. So we won't see any arms flailing or anything like that. But ultimately, we've been building web-based tools for a while now. We actually pivoted off of Excel-based tools and adopted R Shiny. That's a whole other topic altogether in terms of how we deliver our insights. But that enables us to have the back end of R, which is open source and has a ton of AI packages now that are being developed that helps us focus on the deliverable itself as opposed to building the packages and the code under the hood. And we've been able to incorporate this into a landing page. So any of our clients that have these tools, they go to a landing page, they have a bunch of links of, whether it's a conjoint simulator or a chatbot or all of those, depending on the work that they're doing with us. They log right in, and we've built a custom UI that looks similar to, what you would see with an OpenAI or a Perplexity, or a Gemini or any of those. So it's familiar, and ultimately they start their conversation. And it gives folks a couple of those kind of starters as to maybe what the objectives were from the study. So they could ask questions that would then be relevant in the report without a lot of effort in order to kind of get a feel for how the whole conversation is going to work.
I would be really curious to understand two things. One, from a kind of conceptual level, like what does a guardrail look like when you talk about how, because you give the LLM all the data, but then you have to instruct it how to use it. So I think a really concrete example around, without instructing it, it may have said XYZ, we told it to limit itself to ABC. Something like that would be really cool. I'd also love to understand technically how you do that. Because I play around with a whole bunch of these, and I'm familiar mostly with like Perplexity Pro spaces, and I can actually load in an infinite amount of instructions and parameters that like kind of sometimes work, depending on whether or not it wants to pay attention to itself that day. So I'd love to hear an example of the guardrail and then how you actually implement that guardrail.
No, that's a perfect kind of tie-in back to the spectrum of guardrails that I had mentioned earlier, right? Because when we first developed this, the very first one that we built, we ultimately just loaded in the data, and we didn't have a whole lot of additional instruction beyond what were the objectives of the study and, what were we trying to learn, and then all the transcripts, the report, etc. We actually didn't even upload the report to this one. And so I think telling this journey might help clarify your question on the guardrails, right? So up front, myself and some of the folks from our IT team went in and tried to break it right away. And within 3 prompts, I had the thing writing me Python code to build the snake game, right? Which is not what our clients are looking for and not what we want to be paying for with our tokens, as our clients are supposed to be learning more about the research they were doing. So, okay, this isn't working. It's giving us answers that are kind of close to where we want them to be, but it's also going off the rails. So we then put on specific guardrails in the system message, which instructed the AI to only stay on topic and to reply with a specific response. Typically, we have in there, I can't find that information, or I don't have access to that information. Ultimately, if in the RAG search, it can't find anything that's close enough to present as a solution. So because we're leveraging the API and API calls back and forth to achieve our response, we have a lot more control over the levers we can pull, as opposed to just being in like a ChatGPT or Perplexity chat interface where you can't even set the temperature right in those. And so having a developer on staff, we worked on going back and forth and optimizing the system instructions to stay relevant and on topic so that it's not planning someone's trip to France. It's ultimately giving you results on what you're trying to learn. And the way that we've done this is through a series of various scripts that take the unstructured data, convert it into JSON. And I mean, that's the language of AI, right? That's how you can be incredibly efficient with building these tools. If you're just uploading PDFs and things like that, it's not going to get you exactly where you want to go. And then tweaking the system message and then working with the team to make sure that it's giving you the responses that you're expecting. And so after we put those guardrails on, it started saying, no, I can't answer that, which was exactly what we wanted. But then it was still kind of giving answers to questions that we had already answered in the report that were a little bit different than the narrative we wanted to tell. And so we had to further refine the model and realize that putting the report as training data as well, really that was the key. And that's what tightened it all up. And we said, okay, now we've got all of the information, maybe some secondary data and the report. So it's talking like us. It's answering the questions along the same narrative that we've already shared and that we are confident in. And so then as we ask questions that are more tangential to the research, well, it's not okay, we should go make an action on that. We can at least have confidence of testing some of those early ideas that were outside of the scope versus how we had it prior. So I think that the combination of adjusting the system message and making sure that it's staying where it's supposed to, and loading in intentional data to keep things on track. Those two components are really what got us to a successful product where we are today.
That's fantastic to hear about the laser focus of it, because I never considered, it's like an AI deliverable. We had a podcast that we did a few weeks ago with Brand Trust. They don't have a product, but they were theorizing, kind of this like AI buddy, right? And I was like, oh, that would make sense. That would be really cool. And I had never even thought of like, well, this thing's just going to go completely off the rails. It's going to be, like you said, designing a game. It's going to be, contradicting what you had made as your deliverable. And so hearing that you all realize that and find a solution for it, I think is really, really cool. Kind of a follow-up question to that, though. Do you find yourself creating these, the guardrails around the report as a deliverable on like a project by project basis? Or for clients where you do, this is a highly transactional environment, market research is, I'm sure you have clients where you do dozens of projects a year for them. Are you building ecosystems for those clients where they can query numerous projects, or because of the need for all of those guardrails, is it kind of limited to project by project as a report would be limited to that project?
So that's kind of a loaded question, but that's okay. I think that ultimately the way that we build these solutions is not to create a package off the shelf and say, okay, this is KS&R's chatbot offering. It's listening to our clients, understanding their needs, and building a solution that works for that specific space. So, for example, we've done kind of a hybrid of what you're talking about, where we have yet to build a full knowledge base around market research for a specific client, primarily because they also have a diverse portfolio of vendors, and we haven't tackled the whole send us your last 10 years of reports of ours as well as all of our competitors, right? That's ultimately what it takes to have a successful product. And then ultimately you're kind of getting into more internal tools for our clients as opposed to an offering. But on like trackers, for example, this offers a great space where, whether it's a quarterly tracker or a monthly tracker or whatever that looks like, using that and that pulse and that data as a vehicle to store more of that longitudinal trend has been a way that's really gotten us to be kind of that hybrid. So it's not a single one-off, and we can bake in a bit more of trend. And so we're still in the process of understanding what the utility is, and if we can get more predictive beyond just the AI predictions, and can we actually leverage more longitudinal analytics in addition to the AI to kind of bundle more things together, right? And so with those, you can layer in more external factors, whether it's customer price index or inflationary factors or any of those other macroeconomic trends to try and get at a better answer going forward that potentially links the data back better to revenue or ROI or whatever you're looking for than we do today. So those are some of the things that we're working on, and I think that it's still so new that nobody has a silver bullet yet, but we're definitely working towards having solutions for not just those one-offs where we kind of have the process down pretty well, but also what are those broader applications where we can really take a program and use it as a device and a tool to get those insights more efficiently and ultimately help folks make more targeted decisions about the research they need to do in the future.
How collaborative are your clients in this process? And also, have you had any resistance? I mean, I've worked in research for a long time, and many researchers are resistant to change, right? And this is a pretty radical change. They're not getting their same Excel file and the same PowerPoint that they've been used to getting to forever, and the same, not that long ago, I was still delivering a stack of tabs. I'm sure you've seen them. This thick to clients, and that is so old school. It's even hard to comprehend. But some of those people are still want that, and so I'm curious about that situation for you.
So I think that from the kind of original use case of taking a typical qual study and extending it, we're not changing any of that historic process. We're still delivering the report. We're still going through all of that process. There's just an extra deliverable at the end for folks that want to dig deeper. So I think that in that space, things haven't changed. They're just evolving, and there's new offerings now. But in terms of where research is going in the future, I think it still remains to be seen if these standalone AI tools can replace reporting, or if they're going to continue to be a companion to the research, because ultimately there is still a lot of uncertainty, hallucination, and lack of confidence in going outside of whatever the particular research topic was. And so I think you had mentioned collaboration, right? How much collaboration is there in doing this? Ultimately, what we see is, since we're a centralized team, being my team, we work in collaboration with the project teams. So they have the industry knowledge, they own the client relationships, and they ultimately provide a first layer of testing. And that was where we decided, oh, wow, if we don't have the report in there, things are going to go off the rails, and we need to have a better way to ground this thing that keeps it more consistent. And so client collaboration historically is really strong. But when it comes to the AI tools, it's really, it's a value add right now. So we haven't had a whole lot of client collaboration direct in building these things. I think as we get into more of these expansive knowledge bases and programmatic style AI solutions, that's when we're really going to be able to unlock more of that future looking collaboration.
Do you know how far you can push this currently? Like, how much context can you provide? How much desk research could you provide? Like, could you put in economic indicators, and can you go really far, push the boundaries on what you can feed the model that might be useful information, or is that that's breaking the guardrails maybe?
And so I think, again, it really depends on what's the scope of the ask, because there's a lot of relevant information, and how we provide it to these tools is also really important. Because being able to pull like tabular data, for example, sure, you can use that as training data, but we don't want to then be asking these tools to provide summary statistics on an SPSS file, right? Then we know that that's where a lot of the risks come in.
Yeah.
It's ultimately continuing to stay in more of that language input, language output, and converting those metrics however we see fit going forward. So, as you mentioned, pushing these things further, I think it really, as long as we're talking about data that can be wrapped into some sort of structured file without being tabular, we can provide that context in the guardrails. It just means that the testing and the system message work is going to be more extensive. So any of these additional components we bring in are going to require additional time to validate, vet, and make sure it's doing what we expect. Because ultimately, we know the kind of mini use case of that single study works well. When we bring in more external factors, it becomes a bit more challenging to troubleshoot and debug why it's breaking. And so while you certainly can bring in this, and the context window is going to be large enough to handle this with the more modern models, it's a matter of, can you validate it? And can you pinpoint what the problem is or not? So it's a trade-off kind of internally, right? Of how much do we want to put in there versus what capacity and time restrictions do we have to get this thing out the door?
Can you trace its responses back to the source? So if I ask a question about a focus group or an interview, can it tell you, okay, this is who said this and when, and here's how to find it, and things like that for validation purposes?
So I think it depends on the type of tool that you're using, right? So the deliverables that we build have the capability to provide quotes and make mention depending on how we store the data and structure the data, right? Naming those files is incredibly important to be able to trace things back as the AI references where I got things from. But there are other custom tools that do a really good job during research as well. So I think it depends on, does it matter to the client to validate it, or are they expecting that we've already done our due diligence and we're delivering them a tool that is correct and works? And so we've ultimately taken on that burden ourselves, and we run the validation for the custom tools we build. But during the research process, we have other off-the-shelf tools that we use that help our research teams in validating, ensuring everything's working the way we expect, et cetera. So I think the answer is yes and no, just depending on where we are in the research process.
So I'm curious on whether these systems can help our clients self-serve insights from either tracking studies or longitudinal, or and whether that makes the researcher's role from an analyst to more of like a curator and a validator. And I don't know what that, I think you understand the question where I'm kind of getting at. It's just I think things are just changing, and this is probably a good way.
I think that there is always going to be a place for the researcher and research, both in building these tools and being able to guide them in such a way that they can be meaningful and helpful to our clients, right? Because our clients have immense wealth of data, right? And being able to understand what is going to help drive that model to be successful versus what is going to bog it down and get lost in the noise. Being able to use these tools for more longitudinal studies, tracking studies, et cetera. I even think there's value when it comes to thinking about how we use the AI tool itself, right? Because I personally would not go and make, a multi-million dollar R&D or product launch decision based on an outcome from a chatbot, right? I would test a bunch of ideas and kind of see what plays and what doesn't, and use that to inform future research, right? And so at this point, extending AI beyond whatever the specific study or knowledge base that it's grounded on, I think still has merit, right? But it only has as much merit as early ideation and testing. So that instead of doing an early evaluation of 30 different products or ideas or features, you may be able to do that through AI and whittle it down to 10 or 15 and then go into a real conjoint or a max diff or something like that, right? As opposed to having to do exploratory early work. Think that it can also do a great job potentially as a companion for like jobs to be done work in that space, just given the wealth of decisions and things that we're trying to solve for. But as researchers, I think that we have the role of understanding how AI works and understanding the limitations and being that voice and that translator, and not translator in the sense of, it's hard to understand the AI, but where it's going to succeed and where it's not. And so there's also a lot of additional research on research that needs to take place. And, industry-wide regulations, right? It's kind of the Wild West right now. And until there is a consistent structure, maybe there never will be, right? I don't think that we can trust to make true decisions on AI outputs beyond just some of those early stage phases, right? And so that's maybe that answers your question, maybe it doesn't, but that's
that's good answer, I think. Very good, thank you.
So Ben, one thing I'd love you to leave our listeners with: you obviously have spent an incredible amount of time very intentionally, very scientifically, and it seems to me kind of almost like agnostically evaluating these tools and evaluating how and when they should be used. What is your number one do and your number one don't in utilizing AI in the market research process? And particularly if there's a funny story with the don't, I would love to hear like the craziest, weirdest result you've gotten back, because there's a million stories like that out there.
So I think the do is, be transparent and honest, right? There's nothing worse than receiving something that was clearly written or co-created with AI without any sort of tag on it and not understanding, okay, I really need to go through this with that level of a fine-tooth comb versus something that was created by a team member, right? Because I think the expectation is very different when you're receiving a first draft of something that's generated by AI versus a first draft of something that somebody wrote. And so that transparency then fuels and triggers all of those other process, right? It triggers, okay, I need to scrutinize this. Okay, I need to remember the guidelines and guardrails. Okay, I need to understand what data was uploaded into this thing so that I know what it's focusing on and why it's giving these responses, or it wasn't grounded on anything at all, which is, potentially even worse. So that's ultimately, that kind of starts building that trust, both internally as well as with clients. When you're transparent and you can have those conversations. And I think that's a lot of what, I've historically done with all the things that I developed and my team has developed over the years, has been transparency. And AI, I think, is no different, right? AI is, yes, it's new and shiny and exciting, but it's ultimately just another research tool. It's not going to, break anything or really, I think, disrupt in the way that we all thought. I think it's just another tool that we all need to be mindful of how to use. And having that transparency helps everyone stay on the same page. The biggest don't, I could just use the opposite of not being transparent, but I think that's kind of boring. So I would say the biggest don't here at this point is don't expect the AI to do your job for you. And I guess the anecdote that I have that goes along with this one, we were having a debate with one of our clients. Our team had recommended a specific data science technique to solve a specific problem, and we knew it was going to work. We knew it was the right way to go. Ultimately, it was a segmentation discussion around missing data. We went back and forth, used AI to try and understand and solve the problem a little bit. And what the AI gave back was kind of off the wall and radical, and was, again, AI is not a flotation device. So having some of these responses come from, like, I've never even heard of that method. I don't think that this package even exists in R that is referencing, and having to go through and see, okay, we probably tried to one-shot this thing and it wasn't a great idea. And ultimately, we just have to go back to basics, do the research ourselves, understand what our client is asking and why they're recommending a method, why ours is different, why ours is going to work. And ultimately, it was just a good reminder that you really need to be mindful of the asks and the expertise. And so this links back, Brian, to your original question of, hiring and the skill set that folks have, where if you can't see that and you just take the response, like, oh, this looks fine, you're going to have a whole set of problems to deal with later down the road that you don't have to if you can read it with a critical eye and understand things, and then still do your due diligence and read some research papers that back or refute whatever the particular solution is. And so, I guess the don't, kind of to summarize the anecdote, is really don't trust AI to do your job completely. You still have to think through, you still have to validate, and you still have to be mindful of the recommendations you're pulling. Otherwise, you may find yourself at a place where you go to solve this problem and the code that you thought existed doesn't even exist because you didn't do your due diligence. And I could see somebody getting in a lot of hot water for that kind of situation.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. Cool. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. It's cool to have you on as our industry is undergoing in the midst of this innovation revolution, right? And sharing what you guys are doing. Y'all are smart, and I appreciate you coming on and kind of sharing what you all are trying to figure out in terms of making our clients' lives easier ultimately, right? And delivering more powerful insights and making it easier for them to make informed decisions. And so that's amazing. And on a personal note, your company has always been a strong supporter of the University of Georgia Lamar program, which I'm a graduate of. And, you've been an advisory board member, student sponsorships, you've hired lots of people, engaged the industry in lots of kind of interesting topics like this. So on a personal level, it's really great to have you on as well.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure chatting today. Really appreciate, that particular program and everything that it's done for KS&R. And I mean, even a lot of our board members are former grads and heavily supportive of the program. And I attended my first event of them this past year and really got to see it all come to life, hosting it in Atlanta proper this time around. So great to meet a lot of those folks and see how that program continues to evolve and the questions those students are asking about how can they use these tools and be successful to ultimately land themselves a job going forward.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on, and I appreciate your time, and have a great time enjoying staying out of the snow.
That's right.
Anchor's here, unfortunately. Thanks, guys.